11 days. The last 11 days had seemed like something out of those old storybooks that my abuelo used to read to me. He would sit on the edge of my bed, and no matter how tired he was, he always took the time to read to me about the adventures and perils of the Berenstain Bears. When he was finished, he would toss the book aside and kiss me goodnight. I used to hate that part. The rough stubble of his beard always scraped against my cheek, and the scent of his cologne was overpowering. When I grew too old for bedtime stories, I felt relieved that he had stopped kissing me goodnight. It was one of the many regrets I carried from my earlier years into adulthood. I still thought of him often, even though it had been over a year since he had passed. It was a strange feeling to wake up and realize that one of only 2 people who had known me my entire life was gone. The last time I'd seen him had been shortly after meeting V. I'd dragged her off to Oregon to meet them, and while the entire affair was an awkward one, what else could be expected from an elderly couple playing host to a smut editor and her mercenary output for a weekend? It was a good memory to end things on. But my abuela. If there was one thing that made me question the value of long-term relationships, it was how decimated she had become by his absence. I had tried to keep in touch with her as often as I could, calling on weekends to see how she was and if there was anything I could do to help. But her mind was failing, either from dementia or Alzheimer's. She insisted on being called Ainara, even though that wasn't her name, and she often struggled to remember who I was. It hurt. I knew it wasn't her fault, and that she would have done anything to remember me, but it didn't take away the sting of knowing that every moment I'd ever shared with her had been lost. As a child, she had taken to calling me her ranita, her little frog. Now, I was only a stranger. But like any fairy tale, there had to be a happy ending. While there was no longer any comfort to be found in the loving embrace of her bony arms, I still found solace in knowing she would soon be reunited with my abuelo. Not that I believed in any kind of afterlife, religion was for suckers, but still, at least they would be together. As for my story, I didn't know where it was taking me, but if I didn't do something soon, the happy ending I was on the verge of realizing would slip through my fingers. The realization that I'd burned through most of the beauties hadn't hit me until I was in the middle of an edit. I'd split the pills in half to ration them out, but my supply of them had been growing steadily smaller by the day. I needed to do something about it to keep my pattern afloat, but I had procrastinated, and now I only had 3 nights of uninterrupted sleep remaining before I would run out. It was Tuesday evening, and as usual, things had been slow. What wasn't usual, however, was how sketchy things were starting to become. I understood the BDs Susie took in would be of lousy quality and might occasionally skirt the line of what I was comfortable with, but the last few nights had made me question whether or not she was even reviewing them. And it wasn't just the content either. I'd run across 2 shards that hadn't even been formatted correctly and were unreadable. Of course, she hadn't been pleased with that explanation. I was sitting at my desk, nursing a crick in my neck and trying to think of where I could score more beauties when I checked the time. My heart fluttered when I saw it was past 10. Time for my reward. Although we were finally starting to dig our account out of the ditch I'd dug, I was still keeping a close eye on every eddy. A cocktail or 2 at the bar each night quickly added up, but a drink from my own stash, while not exactly classy, was a far more economical option. I was keeping it down to a single, casual glass each night, usually around the time I reached the halfway point of the evening. The tiny shots I knocked back each morning helped clear up the grogginess I felt when I woke up. I wasn't under any illusions it was healthy, but that only reinforced that I knew what I was doing, that I was in control. But after filling my glass, something stopped me this time from raising it to my lips. Instead, I stared back at it. Shit. 3 more nights was all I had left. I might be able to stretch that to 6 by splitting them in quarters, but that would only delay the inevitable by a few more days, and then I would risk having the nightmares return. It wasn't that I was afraid of them. It was that I couldn't trust myself not to blurt something out in my sleep that might raise V's suspicions. But unlike V, I knew what I was doing and was firmly in control. If I cut myself off like I knew I easily could, I'd simply be repeating the same mistake I had made earlier of going too far too quickly. Weaning was the solution. I had a pattern that worked, and more importantly, I had control of my life again. That was something I couldn't afford to fuck up. Xander. I jumped out of my chair and bounded up the stairs in delight as I rushed toward the only obvious solution. How could I not have seen it? There was no fucking way I could get at V's hollow again. Hell, she'd even deleted her dealer's contact information. But Xander could surely get his hands on some. It was an easy walk to the bar. Mateo was there to greet me, like always, though I was already busy searching the booths as I sat down. Hey, Judy. Hey, went the usual. Where was he? His customary booth was empty, and I didn't see any sign of him at the others. Actually, have you seen Xander around? Mateo shook his head. Afraid not. I don't think he's been hanging around much this past week. It's been pretty slow lately. It took effort to hide the rush of panic that swept over me and caused my fingers to turn to ice. I didn't have his number. He was always supposed to be here, a staple at Lizzie's for nearly as long as Susie had run the joint. Just because things had slowed down a little wasn't any reason to suddenly ghost his customers. His customer, who he'd given free hits to and who had bought almost nothing from him. Fuck. You alright? I realized I was doing a poor job of masking my concern, and that was all the hint someone like Mateo needed to pick up that something was wrong. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, can you get my usual? Sure thing. His voice was oddly flat as he spoke, and if I hadn't known any better, I would have guessed he was disappointed. As soon as he turned around, my heart began to race. What the fuck was I going to do? God damn it, why had I been stupid and waited until I was almost out? Now I would have to ration what I had left. Unless... Mateo, I'll be back in a minute. I stood and awkwardly made my way toward the entrance. Rita was a good chum and had always had my best interests at heart, but I couldn't figure out why my feet were slowing as I approached the far end of the dance floor. It wasn't like she didn't know I used from time to time. Hell, we'd even gotten high before, so what was the big deal? I was suddenly reminded of the day I had picked up my keys from Rita's place. Something about her had seemed off, besides the fact that she had looked like a disheveled wreck. But there wasn't any time to ponder it as I stepped out into the cool night air. Hey, doll. For once, I wasn't the least bit startled by her. Don't call me doll. And what are you doing out here? That was a good question. I decided to be straight with her. Don't suppose you have a way to get a hold of Xander by any chance, do you? Rita slung the bat that was in her hand over the back of her neck and hung her wrists over opposite ends of it. With those arms of hers, she could easily snap the heavy piece of lumber in half like a pencil. Afraid not. Guy was always a careful little fucker, if not horribly overdressed. Why? Well, I was hoping to get a little pick-me-up from him, you know? The corners of her lips raised into a pair of sharp points as her eyes glinted with mischief. Feeling a little under the weather? Oh, fuck off. I crossed my arms defiantly, in no mood to play games with her. I'm out, and the bastard just decided to ghost the place. It's not like I'm fiending for anything. I was just hoping to score a little dust. Rita's eyes lingered on me longer than I liked before casually surveying the abandoned lot. She was swinging that bat of hers from side to side, almost the way a child would when playing with a chum of theirs. Her eyes finally found their way back to me. I think I might know a way to help you out. No, I quickly admonished her. I'm absolutely not doing any snap coke again. Not after last. Fuck, Jude, keep it down. This place is still a business, and we gotta keep our licenses. Besides, I'm not talking about a little coke. I'm talking about getting you in touch with my dealer. You mean you didn't buy from Xander? Her laughter almost bordered on condescension, as if she and everyone else was in on some secret I'd been left out of. Judy, doll, Xander wasn't much more than a glamorized pimp. He had the usual wares and not much else, but Janice has got a line on all the truly preem stuff. Janice? That's right. Want me to make a call? You seem a little edgy. I'm not edgy, I barked back, suddenly feeling defensive. I didn't like the way Rita always seemed to know what was going on inside my head. It was already hard enough trying to sort through my own thoughts without having to worry about her seeing right through me. If I had truly just been after Dust, I easily could have waited, but with Xander gone, I didn't know anyone else I could go to. I certainly couldn't ask Roxanne where she was buying from, and if this dealer of hers was as good as she was proclaiming to be, then that would be a quick fix. So, is that a yes or a no? I didn't see any other way out of my predicament. Yeah, if you could. I'd appreciate it. Rita's smile widened as her eyes took on a blue glow as she made the call. Seeing as how I didn't know what to do with myself while I waited, I crossed my arms and listened in on the conversation. Even though she should have been focused on the video feed of her dealer, I had the distinct sense Rita was looking at me, sizing me up. Part of me wanted to tell her to forget all about it, but her eyes dimmed before I could say anything. Janice will be here in about 20 minutes. I nodded, shifting out of the way for a small group of patrons that Rita waved inside. Word of the wise. Janice is nothing like Xander. Tends to stick down in the Glen. You sure he's safe? Judy, doll, you're always in good hands with me. Rita suddenly swung the bat with such force that I could hear the low pitch of a wind rush over its smooth surface as it swung through the air. Winking, she gestured me inside. Just like her knowing looks, I also didn't like the way she commanded me about from time to time. That might work with her outputs, but not for me. But with nothing else to do but stand around, I begrudgingly complied and went back inside. I wasn't starving, but perhaps an order of nachos might spark my appetite. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I sat at the bar, waiting for this dude to show up. It would have been helpful if I had some idea what he looked like, but that was my own fault for not having thought to ask Rita earlier. The nachos Mateo brought to me were good like always, but I was too preoccupied to focus on eating, and choosing instead to nibble away at them, one chip at a time. Yo, Judy? I turned and was about to pass the woman off as just another one of Susie's clients when I noticed the odd way she was looking at me. That's me. Are you Janice? She was nothing like what I had expected, and not the least of which because she was a woman. Unlike Xander, who certainly would have dressed to the nines and taken great care over every detail of his immaculate image, Janice never would have warranted a second look from me, but something about the swift and decisive way her green eyes darted about told me that was intentional. That's me, she said in a low voice as she sat down next to me and waved Mateo away. So, Rita said you needed help. I stared back at her blankly. Fuck, I was so used to dealing with Xander that I hadn't needed to talk in code in ages. Yeah. Been having a hard time sleeping, so call a clinic. She turned her attention away from me and studied the dance floor. I had to hand it to her. She was good. Sure, Lizzie's was as safe a place as possible for dealing, but she wasn't about to take any chances on unfamiliar turf. Looking for beauties, I said low enough so that only she could hear me. Beauticulite H, just to be specific. Her eyes shot back to me. For the first time since she'd introduced herself, she allowed a subtle hint of a smile to cross her face. I spotted a row of metallic teeth between her lips that contrasted with her brown skin and short black hair. But she said nothing. Instead, her hand drifted across the bar toward me. I was about to yank my own hand away, thinking she was trying to hit on me, when I noticed the thin bag under her palm. I didn't need any explanation of what the gold powder inside of it was. It was a simple enough test, but one I really didn't want to subject myself to. Rita could have warned me how paranoid Janice was, but I didn't see any way of getting out of it. If I refused, she would stand up and walk out the door without a second thought, and it was only dust, a single hit judging from the size of the bag. Fine, I muttered. Mateo. No stranger to what was taking place, Mateo plucked a straw out of a nearby container and handed it to me. Once again, I felt like I was being studied as I pried the bag open and poured the dust into a narrow line. There was little reason to exercise care. All she wanted to see was the dust go up my nose. Then, we could talk more openly about my problem. The ground flakes rushed through the straw and into my nostril, burning their way through my sinuses. But the heat passed quickly, much faster than Xander's stuff did. Almost immediately, I felt my body lifting off the bar stool even though I knew I was still sitting. There was something familiar about this. Good, she acknowledged, her frame relaxing. Now let's talk biz. I leaned forward and tried to blink away the glassiness in my eyes. I don't know what Rita told you about me, but I don't deal with the medical stuff. Too hard to get and too little profit. I was so stupid. If I'd had any brains at all, I would have asked Rita to check with Janice first. Instead, I had lied and dragged this dealer halfway across downtown for no fucking reason, and she didn't seem the type to easily forgive that kind of transgression. You ever heard of the Sandman before? My lack of interest in whatever urban legend she was referring to was surpassed only by my bewilderment at just how bizarre the question was. The Sandman was a magical man who visited the sleeping children and put sand in their eyes to make them sleep. I had heard this one before, though I had only been a young child. Abuelo used to say something about him coming to give me sweet dreams when he tucked me in at night. I even remembered trying to stay awake to see if he would actually come and visit me, but I never saw him. I'm pretty sure that's how the fairy tale goes. Janice nodded. The Sandman not real, of course, but his sand is. She produced an elongated cylinder from one of the many pockets lining her cargo jacket. It was filled with a black, tar-like substance. You ever tried Sandman before? Rita had said I could trust Janice, or at least that I could trust her, but my hands remained glued to the counter as she extended the unfamiliar drug to me. At least, I thought my hands were still where I had left them. I was feeling good, but it was hard to remember my definitions. No, this isn't the usual shit being sold on the streets, she continued. This is normally a powerful tranquilizer they use in riot control, but it's been diluted so that it only knocks you out after a couple minutes. Jesus, all I wanted was some sleeping meds to help me through the next few weeks. So why wasn't I shaking my head and telling her I didn't want that it was too much? All I had to do was say no. And then I would be fucked. No way to repress the nightmares, no way to keep myself from blabbering something too revealing when I wasn't awake. Sensing my indecision, she pulled the cylinder away and reached into another pocket. My heart skipped a beat as soon as my eyes caught on the familiar-looking inhaler she produced. Even though it had been years since I'd whiffed, it might as well have been yesterday. If Sandman isn't what you want, then how about lace? It numbs you to the point that you may as well be sleeping. I didn't need any explanation. Just the sight of the inhaler had brought back a flood of memories I thought I'd buried in the deepest recesses of my mind. I had been so young. Too young. It would work, though. I had spent so many nights at Cindy's place when I was growing up, and most of the time I didn't even remember falling asleep or of any dreams I might have had. And goddamn, that feeling when that shit rushed through my lungs, it was like breathing in God. It made everything go away. Made me untouchable. But I couldn't. I shouldn't. I refused to dive back into the worst parts of my adolescence just to escape the most painful parts of my adulthood. Forward was the only way out of this, not backwards. Right foot, left foot. Even if I told myself some time ago that I didn't need to do any more walking. So what do you want? she blurted out, clearly growing impatient with me. My mind raced. Lace was out of the question, but she didn't have beauties, and while I couldn't give two shits what she thought about me, Rita was a different matter. She'd gone out on a limb for me and brought her dealer down here. How would it look if she left empty-handed? How much for Sandman? She held up the cylinder once again. This is 1,000. In an instant, I came crashing back down into my body. 1,000 eddies? For that? Course, this'll give you about 25 eats. I'll let you do the math. You seem like the smart type. Even with the dust coursing through my veins, she was absolutely right. I could do the math, and suddenly, it wasn't such an egregious amount. V had been burning through nearly 2,000 eddies a month on beauties. This would be almost half that amount, assuming I only did one hit a day, and I didn't dare to do any more than that. A good night's sleep was all I needed, and at that price, we would still be saving now that V had kicked her habit. What was I doing? I was so disgusted with myself that I wanted to jab a finger down my throat and puke out the notion that had nearly settled in my gut. V had kicked her habit to the curb. It hadn't been easy, but she had fucking done it. And here I was, talking to a dealer I didn't know, about to blow through a big chunk of our savings just so I could, not have to lie again in case I woke up screaming for those fuckers to stop? How much was a lie worth? Not this much. V had put in the effort. She deserved the same from me. That was what I kept reminding myself of. I only needed to keep up appearances. I'm sorry, but not really feeling either of these. Lace or Sandman, I mean. Seeing Janice's brow beginning to crease, I quickly added, but I'll take some dust. Your shit's preem. That seemed to relax her. It wasn't a lie either. That's good to hear. After putting away her other wares, that fucking inhaler was still peeking out at me, she dug into her jeans pocket and pulled out another bag, larger than the one she'd slid across to me earlier. This is 100. And, like you said, it's preem. All the rage on the south side. Whether you be going into the El Coyote Coho or Velvet Underground, you're gonna be sure to have a party. I was impressed. Even Xander, with his lower grade crap, had usually charged me closer to 200. At that price, it was practically a steal, and I hadn't even asked for a first-time discount. Of course, she hadn't offered one either. A piece of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. That was why this feeling was so familiar. Roxanne had been many things, but wealthy or able to get her hands on the very best, well, that hadn't been her. The bag of dust Janice was dangling in front of me like a piece of candy had to be the same stuff Roxanne had gotten her hands on. Whether some gang was flooding the market to squeeze out a competitor, or if someone had just cracked the mind-numbing code of capitalism and found a better way to make it cheaper, I wasn't about to complain. I'll take it. Good. She handed me the bag after I had transferred what was owed. And by the way, I came here because Rita's a good customer of mine, and I thought you might be as well. But if you're gonna call me again, it better be for more than this. Sure, I will. Sorry if I wasted your time, I stammered, hoping I wasn't getting Rita in trouble. Well, I'm not gonna stick around here. She started to stand and then paused, her eyes surveying the bar. Course, I'm not seeing much competition here either. She looked back at me. I'll give you my deets in case you want something else. Just remember, don't waste my fucking time. I didn't have a chance to reply as she turned and walked away. As soon as she rounded the coat check and disappeared from view, I breathed a long sigh. Everything okay, Judy? Mateo asked. He knew the fucking answer, just the same as I did. In fact, he probably knew it even better than I. He'd stood behind that bar for years, watching all kinds of exchanges and deals go down. But it was only dust, nothing else. I was doing this for V, and if that meant telling a few white lies in the middle of the night, V, your own nightmares are starting to cause me some. Then so be it. But fuck. That inhaler. If V had found it even half as hard as I was to kick her shit to the curb, then she was made of much stronger stuff than I gave her credit for. And she had even found the time to do something special for me. For us, with that surprise date night at Blue. I smiled as an idea suddenly popped into my head. I'd have to check with V on scheduling so it didn't conflict with any gigs she might have lined up, but already I was feeling better as I dove back into my nachos with renewed hunger. I'm good, Mateo. In fact, I'm preem.